Okay, so most Varus players are playing the on-hit build. They opt for lethal tempo so they can make perfect use of items like Rageblade and Wit's End, as well as Varus's hard-scaling attack speed passive in the late game. But there is a multi-season challenger Varus main in Korea called 볼붕이1 who does something entirely different. Not only has this player hit rank 1 on the Varus leaderboards, but they are also playing Lethality Varus with Arcane Comet. Lethality Varus has been nerfed to death by Riot, so you rarely see it these days. But 볼붕이1 apparently doesn't care, as this Varus is absolutely dominating the top of the Korean solo queue ladder with a 72% win rate. So in this video, we will look exactly at how the new Lethality Varus strategy works in Season 13, but first I will give you the rank 1 player's rune and item setups so you can copy those right away. 볼붕이1's rune page is Arcane Comet, Mana Flow Band, Absolute Focus and Scorch, with Magical Footwear and Biscuit Delivery secondary. Whereas the aforementioned on-hit Varus is played for its late game scaling, Lethality Varus is all about early game dominance, as you're about to see. You take full advantage of Varus's early game poke damage, and Arcane Comet is of course your best keystone for that playstyle. The damage in lane racks up really quickly, but even in the mid and late game, this keystone still does quite a number due to its scaling with attack damage and armor pen. For the same reason, you also add Scorch into the mix. This rune naturally doesn't do all that much in the late game, but again, this playstyle is about early game power, and here the additional pressure it provides goes a long way. Absolute Focus is another natural choice for as strong a lane phase as possible, and since Lethality Varus plays from range, you will often be on high HP yourself, so the rune stays active. The one thing Lethality Varus kinda struggles with, especially early on, is mana management. Your spells are quite expensive, so both Mana Flow Band and Biscuit Delivery are an absolute must if you want to make the strategy work. Magical Footwear is always nice on Lethality champions, since Lethality is exponentially stronger the more of it you have the earlier into the game. And saving 300 gold on boots means 300 more gold you can spend on your next serrated dirk instead. By the way, keep in mind that if you want to have educational league content like this in your personal feed, all you need to do is click the subscribe button. Your item build is pretty straightforward. For most champions and playstyles, you need to adapt your items to solve specific problems in your individual matchup, but Lethality builds are always highly streamlined and therefore easy to copy. You start with a longsword and buy a Tear of the Goddess on your first base. The first item you complete is Ghostblade, and you upgrade your magical boots to Boots of Swiftness as soon as possible. Varus is immobile, so the extra movement speed in combination with your high impact ultimate makes you much more difficult to catch. Also, charging your Q arrow applies a self-slow, which means the passive on Boots of Swiftness inherently synergizes with your strategy by mitigating this drawback. Between the move speed from Ghostblade and your boots, landing Q arrows will be much easier for you than it is supposed to be. Afterwards, you build your mythic item Eclipse. Theoretically, any of the Lethality mythics could work here, but the main selling point of Eclipse is its % armor penetration. Percent pen is a must for Lethality builds due to how the math works out, but because Varus needs Tear and Manamune, you have to delay your last Whisper item until 4th with this build. So Eclipse helps dealing with that issue to some degree, but going Duskblade would also be okay, and 볼붕이1 has done it in the past as well. However, at this point your Tear should be fully stacked, which means upgrading it gives you access to Mirror Mana right away. The bonus damage on your Q and your E is a big power spike for the mid game. But as mentioned, a last Whisper item has enormous value in Lethality builds, so for Varus, Cyrilda's Grudge is the optimal next item. It comes with extra ability haste, and the slow it applies on your Q makes your Arcane Comet a little more reliable as well. For your last item, you want Edge of Night. It is a rather defensive Lethality item, but a little extra safety goes a long way in the late game. Enemy dive champions do have a hard time to get to you if you position correctly, since your Q outranges most of their engage, but if they manage to close the gap, you're in trouble. Every death in the late game could be the end of the match, since respawn timers are so long. Therefore, the spell shield and extra HP are most valuable here. However, you naturally want to close out games early with this build, since other AD carries will outscale you generally speaking when given the opportunity. While still useful later on, thanks to your insanely strong teamfighting ultimate, the early and mid game is what counts the most for Lethality Varus. So keeping all this in mind, let's now deep dive into the actual gameplay analysis and see exactly how it works in practice. For being an early game pick, your level 1 with Lethality Varus is actually quite weak. Sure, you can cast your E on cooldown, and the slow guarantees that your Arcane Comet connects as well, but against truly strong bot lane combos like Draven Pike, you have to take a step back at first. However, as long as you play it patiently and let your E poke rack up damage over time, you should be okay. So, when exactly does this strategy start to put in real work? Well, your first big power spike is level 3, because now you got all your abilities at the ready. The threat of your W-empowered Q is real, and even Draven has to respect it. Just make sure to actually press your W, since its bonus damage is absolutely necessary in situations like this. Anyway, before first base, you could only harass a little bit with your E, since spamming Q as well would be too mana intensive. However, as soon as you get your first recall off and buy Tear of the Goddess, the playstyle fully comes live. With infinite mana, your E and especially your Q outrange other bot lane champions so exorbitantly that they cannot really challenge the lane anymore. And if they are too stubborn to recall despite being low, this happens. Again, always make sure to use the W active for the surprise execute damage. Lane phase is really just a joke at this point, since your range advantage is so ridiculous. Every single extra level makes this even worse for your opponents, since more points in Q means both more damage and lower cooldowns. You just keep chipping away at them, and as long as you are careful enough not to get all-in'd, you will hold priority. The enemy really has no room to actively outplay you. It is more like a game of do not fail from your perspective, and your opponents will simply lose lane over time. If played optimally, worst case for you would be that the enemy bot plays it safe and recalls to only lose minions and platings. Best case scenario is your team takes notice of the situation and sets up a free dive. In skirmishes like this, your AoE ultimate stops any form of opposing counterplay in its tracks. The longer you can stay in lane, the better, since during this phase of the game, Lethality Varus is in full control. You can mess with your opponent and keep the minion wave in a favorable state all by yourself, allowing your support to make plays with your team. And holding priority like this is especially important in bot lane, since here you make it very difficult for the enemy to challenge dragons. In this game, the opposing mid lane is actually quite fed, but look at how Bolbungiye plays for maximum impact and minimal risk at the same time. Notice how Varus set up his own ultimate with his E-slow? Missing R can lose you a teamfight, so Bolbungiye is making absolutely sure it lands. And with his excellent wave clear, Varus can instantly push the minion wave after a fight like this, making the enemy lose farm on top of everything. Always looking for small wins like this too is essential when you play an early game champion, since you have to snowball. However, Varus hadn't even had his biggest power spike yet. You keep getting stronger and stronger the longer the lane phase takes, but you reach your peak when you hit level 9, since this is where you max out your Q. In combination with your lethality items, you are entering dangerous territory. Sure, your team might get crushed, but Draven is not allowed to play anymore, and isn't this all that counts? No, seriously, by taking full advantage of your early game dominance, you are essentially playing 5 versus 4, since the enemy AD carry just couldn't lane properly. And it truly does impact the entire map, even when your teammates have been struggling. Just look at how this lane phase comes to a close. 볼붕이1 has essentially 1v9'd the entire early game with Lethality Varus, giving the team much needed breathing room. Now entering the mid game, you need to make sure to still take advantage of Varus's range. In lane, you could always fall back on the safety of your tower. This is obviously no longer the case outside of lane phase, and this is also where many Varus players go wrong. You need the protection of your team, they are your new bot lane tower now. With Lethality Varus, you have to make it as difficult as possible for the opponent to get on top of you. If you are ever caught by opposing engage, you will be a sitting duck and a liability to your team. But if you are nearby when the same thing happens to an ally, you can truly shine. Always be trigger happy with your ultimate, it is your win teamfight button. By consistently playing around your allies and having their backs, you stop them from falling further behind while staying safe at the same time. Varus is an excellent siege champion, greatly rewarding your team for grouping up. You are always that threat in the background that stops the enemy from being proactive due to the fear of Varus's counter-engage. Of course, Varus has a big target on his back, so 볼붕이1 does everything possible to stay out of harm's way. When played like this, the enemy is in a lose-lose situation. They either sacrifice tower after tower, or they ultimately bite the bullet and engage regardless. But all engages are hopeless if they cannot get a hold of Varus himself. Crazy plays like this are your opponent's best shot. But this is exactly why you always stay with your team, so the enemy is not encouraged to actually make these calls. But yeah, not only are blue team losing Baron for this, but also yet another dragon. When you use your lead to secure all the objectives, winning the game is almost trivial, so blue team ends up surrendering here. But if you also want to know how to play Varus like a late game hypercarry instead of an early game snowball champion, I've already covered that in another video. Just click the link on your screen right there.